Hi, welcome back to, I guess we now have a name, Let's Talk Podcasts, which is very creative, for where we highlight people who are in podcasting, specifically members of the Feminist Podcasters Collective and other people doing work in podcasting. And today I'm joined by member Nicole Havelka, whose podcast is Just Rest. And you've been podcasting, I know, for just about a year.
I launched in January 1st.
Yes,
so
but
the
you've been developing your podcast for
way longer than that. That's probably been like 2 years if you count development.
We'll talk a little bit about, we'll talk mostly about, I think, that journey, because you did something different than a lot of other people, and certainly than anyone else we've had a conversation with, which was doing some crowdfunding to get your podcast off the ground. And I think that could be really interesting to explore. Before we do, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what your show is about.
Yeah. So Just Rest, Burnout Tips for Everyday Radicals is a podcast for change makers who are tired but not giving up. That's how and so it's full of both conversations about the reasons for burnout, about people's burnout journeys, but then also I try to include some practical tips at the end, tips for both rest, getting more rest, and resisting burnout culture.
Excellent. And I wonder if you could, we'll start with you answering my question that I've asked everyone, which is, what's the reason you podcast?
The reason I podcast is to create a rest revolution.
Ooh, that sounds very big. And I love that. I love people with big ambitions. So why podcasting? Obviously, anyone can blog. You can use social media. There's like a million ways we can market our businesses. And podcasting is certainly one of those, but it doesn't have to be one. So what was it about? Because you were drawn to podcasting long before you launched. What was it about the medium that you were interested in and that excited you?
I mean, I'm a bananas podcast listener. That was true before I did a podcast. For me, I think part of the appeal, I don't think I knew this about myself until like later in life, but I think I'm just an auditory learner. And that's true for a lot of people, because some people believe you can't learn and remember. I mean, because they just learn differently. They're like, well, you couldn't possibly read a book on audiobook and remember it. I'm like, I remember it better than when I read it, like honestly, visually. So it's just a matter how it sticks in our brains. And for me, it's listening to podcasts and audiobooks are like, I think, a throwback to being young and people reading to you. And I loved being read to as a kid. For that matter, I mean, I'm single and I live alone, so there's no opportunity for regular humans to read to me anymore very often. But like, I'd be all about it if there was someone in the room who wanted to do it. So like, if that was your jam, I've heard of people doing that. I've never done it.
Well, you can hire people to cuddle you now, so I'm sure you could hire someone to do anything. But
I mean, if you're willing to pay enough, people will do a lot of things, right?
Really, I think almost anything.
Almost anything.
So it's that, but I think what many people have touched on with podcasting is the intimacy that it could create between you and the listener, and that is something that you enjoyed as the listener, and so you thought you'd like it as the speaker. You've done a full season of your show. Is it what you thought it would be? Like, how are you feeling about podcasting now that you've done it?
Yes and no. So yes, in a way, it's more than I expected. Like, it's way more and better in a lot of ways. It does help facilitate relationship and building relationship. That's still, I mean, I'm still a baby podcast. So like, I haven't gotten a lot of that feedback, but I have heard, at least in one case, someone who I hadn't met who was referred to me as a coaching client who said, oh yeah, I listened to the podcast and then I scheduled a meeting with you. So I know that power of that being relationship building is helping, and that people can hear me talking with guests in the case of my podcast, or occasionally I do solo episodes. People can get to know me in a different way, and they hear a real voice, which I think is a piece of what you're saying, the intimacy of podcasting and the ability to build relationships. Because I know that there's podcasters I've listened to for years, in some cases, who feel like friends to me. Now, they're totally not, because I don't know them in real life in most cases. Yeah. I mean, I know my friends in the Feminist Podcast Collective. I know them outside of the podcast. But it still enhances our relationship, because I listen to your podcast sometimes, Becky, and I come back to you, or I post on socials or something like that and say, this part of the podcast really grabbed me, or I did something differently because I got an idea from that podcast. And people do that with other things, other media too. But I just think that there is something so powerful about human voices and was this just in our newsletter that like the number of AI generated podcasts is like obscene, like a third of them or something now?
A third of new podcasts that are being created right now.
Oh my gosh. Well, I got
entirely AI, not just like edited by AI. That's a different story.
Right.
AI voices in the whole thing. Yeah.
Which is, I can't even, like, I'm not even going to go there. Cause there's things full disclosure, there are things like transcription and things like that I use AI for with the podcast. But these are real live humans, myself included, who are on the podcast. And I think in a world where we're really skeptical, like, because we're not sure, are people real, or we don't have that level of contact, like voices, connecting via our voices is really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've also done this is something I've also done this year, is kind of done a deeper dive into my own human design. And apparently I'm designed for podcasting.
Yeah. And it's not for everyone, obviously, either as
it's totally not for everybody.
It's not for everyone as a listener, or the way we receive information, or the way we give information. But it's great when you have a feeling that, I think if you enjoy listening to podcasts, you're probably going to be more likely to enjoy creating and delivering a podcast. Totally. One would assume, right? It's still not for everybody, but it's a great thing to explore. And can be one really great part of our marketing ecosystem, or for some people, maybe the entirety. But I think for most people, it's just a part of an ecosystem.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, can I just add something? Yeah. I'm thinking about the relationship building on two levels. One is with my guests. And one of the things I plan to do, since there's probably other podcasters listening, and I got this idea from a guest on FPC, is to have a gathering maybe quarterly of all my guests. First of all, because they're really awesome and they should know each other if they don't already, but and creating networking opportunities for them. And then that's good for me too, in the long run. But it's a long-term relationship strategy, it's not that a quick funnel to a product. That's not what it's doing.
Yeah. And I think there may be some people for whom that is the thing, but I think for most people it's not. And shout out to Great Wasserman of RSS.com.
Thank you. I couldn't remember who it was.
Who had an amazing session for our members inside of the Feminist Podcast Collective. And I go back to those ideas frequently. His whole thing was about how do we maximize those relationships that we're building with guests? Because too often we sort of see them as just these people who come in and out of our ecosystem briefly to be on our show. But really, a podcast can be a really relationship-driven tool and deepening tool, not just with your listeners, as you said, but with your guests as well. So it's great that you took that from that.
And I've been holding that idea since before I launched the podcast.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about the launch, because that's where I really want to spend the bulk of our time, because I think I've talked to, quite a few members at this point for this series. I think you're the 9th or 10th of them, which is amazing. And the thing that I think you did differently than pretty much everyone else I've talked to is that you chose the path of crowdfunding your show to get it off the ground, because podcasting can be virtually free, not free. You have to pay somewhere to host it at minimum. You're going to have a computer and a way of editing, or at least a way of recording. You could theoretically do all of those pieces on your desktop with the tools that come with most laptops, but the hosting you'd have to pay. So at minimum, you got to pay hosting. But you could theoretically do a podcast virtually free, or almost, right? However, most people don't want their show to be that show, right? They want to have maybe a decent microphone, maybe a tool, a platform like I'm using Riverside or Transistor or whatever, but tools to help them in the process. And for many people, they recognize that quality editing, quality recording, quality transcription, show notes, all of those things take time. It takes human time, even with the assistance of AI, to get all of that in a format, creating graphics, so that our users, our listeners, can have everything that they need presented to them in a way that they want. And that takes a lot of time and or help, which then takes money, right?
Right.
So podcasting can run a big spectrum from almost nothing to thousands and thousands of dollars an episode, depending on where you're at in that spectrum of, do you use video and how many people are helping you with all of that. You knew about yourself that you wanted help in this process, that for you to get it done. And I love, because your work is around burnout. So that you didn't want this to be a thing that leads you to burnout. And we see that so many times people take on a podcast, don't recognize how much work it's going to be to create the show that they really want to create. And then they burn out on it and they don't even make it through a season. They don't do 5 episodes. That's why so many shows end after just a couple of episodes. And you didn't want that to happen. Wisely knew that that could be a thing. And so you knew there's a certain amount of money I want to spend. So before we go into how you raise the money, I want you to talk a little bit about what was it that you identified as the need to do crowdfunding for? What kind of expenses were you looking at? And what was it about paying for those things that you knew was important to you versus, again, trying to just sort of bootstrap it yourself?
Right. So the main thing that I really, it ended up being the only thing I ended up raising the money for was a launch partner. So I raised the money to hire Alicia Galati of Galati Media, who's a member of the Feminist Podcasters Collective, who I met there and got to know. So I wanted to work with her on my launch. I originally tried to raise $12,000, which would have covered the cost of Alicia launching, plus some, like at least a few months of editing and being able to pay to buffer some of my costs, like you were mentioning for the technology and stuff, which I don't do a whole lot of, but there are 3 or 4 platforms I use that I have to pay monthly fees for. And so I originally tried to raise, I think it was $12,000 for that. I didn't hit it originally, and I was on Kickstarter, which, fun fact, is an all or nothing platform. So if you don't hit your goal, you don't get any of it, which creates a lot of confusion for the people who gave you money. Because I did raise almost $5,000 that first time, which is a big chunk of it. It wasn't like I raised $4. I raised like almost half of what I needed. And most people are like, oh, you just don't get that? I'm like, no, your card wasn't charged. So what I ended up doing, and I already knew this was my plan B because I knew it was a risk doing that on Kickstarter, that then what I did is that I did do my best to keep emails. And the other thing that's really tricky in Kickstarter, they don't give you the emails unless you finish. Fortunately, I knew most of the people, or at least if I didn't have an email, I knew how to contact them. So I went back to all of those people. I created my own link in Square, which is one of the processing systems I use. There's an easy way to do a donation link in Square. I made a simple donation link and said, hey, I'm really sorry I'm coming back to you again, but can you give me your original donation? So in that it was bumpy and it was good because in some ways, so what happened is that some people who gave the first time didn't give. There weren't very many of those, but in some cases, some people, like I heard this maybe from 1 or 2 people, their financial situation changed, so they couldn't give it again. For other people, but I picked up new people because I was still talking about it for longer than the month I originally gave it. So I was crowdfunding up until the minute I paid Alicia in December. So I started in August and I didn't finish really crowdfunding until December. That's both the good thing and the not good thing about having done the crowdfunding. It
the money you
a ton of time.
Was for launching then. So
Purely launching.
Helping just
That's
get
all I wrote.
Out marketing mostly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Marketing. Well, what she does is actually produces the show soup to nuts for the first 3 episodes. So it actually made the initial production of the podcast go hyper speed because I was crowdfunding, like I just mentioned, for months, I didn't have any content in the can. Like I just, between having like a business to run and trying to crowdfund, which is a high maintenance, high energy thing, like I just didn't get that hardly any content done. So I recorded the first 3 episodes within a week of each other in December.
Got it.
And then gave them to her, like, because if I had done it, so the main reason I crowdfunded, not only to prevent burnout, was because I knew if I'd bootstrapped it myself, it would take me a year to do all of that on my own. I mean, just because I'd have to do it piecemeal.
Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit about the taking over and all of that in a second. But first, how much did you end up crowdsourcing in that first?
About 5,000.
So you were able to.
And that was what basically covered that launch expense.
Got it. And you were able to recoup then all the stuff that you had lost through the Kickstarter, basically. Get right back to that.
I did. Again, I lost a few, but gained a few. So it came up about a wash.
All right. So about $5,000, that covered the launch, got you those first 3 episodes out, kind of gave you that jump start at getting this the season going. The season was longer than 3 episodes. So you at some point had to kind of take over the reins and continue. How did that process go for you? And what did that show you about like the demands on podcasters? And
right away in December, or right away in January because we dropped them on January 1st. So literally on the 1st of January, which went really well. I took over after that. I know Becky knows, but people listening may not know that like my computer died in January, literally on January 3rd. the computer I was using, I then got delayed by like a month. So I actually didn't release. I had one scheduled and was able to record a recording for the 4th episode. But I couldn't, I was using like another person's computer and going to the library and all kinds of crazy stuff for a few weeks. So I couldn't do the editing and work that I wanted to do because of all of that. So that was another big wrinkle that had nothing to do with the crowdfunding. It was just lifing. I got a new computer by the end of January-ish. And then that's probably when I really started in earnest. And so I had a real leg up because one of the things that Alicia gives you are like tons of templates. So, well, she had made all the graphic templates, like that was all done, which made things like on the graphic side easy. Like I had all these templates of emails to send guests and, not necessarily an onboarding process. I eventually built that myself, but at least here are the templates of what you would write people and something to start from, which again is so good to have that in front of you. But it doesn't change the fact that like in the beginning, you're like, I was so overwhelmed by just onboarding guests for a while because I didn't have I hadn't automated all of that. And how do I do that with an online scheduler and things like that, which now is pretty well set. But that was another couple of months at least of just rewriting templates, figuring out that system, onboarding guests, and then figuring out I had to start editing myself and doing and she did all the content too. So the blog version of the blog, the version of the Substack, I had to edit all of that with her, but I didn't write anything. I had drafts of everything to work from, where now I do use AI to help me draft from a transcript, but then I rewrite everything. Yeah. It's far more time. I'm sure most other guests if they've talked about the technicality of podcasting, I spend far more time on the other content than I do on the podcast itself.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's not no work, right? Even when you
not no work, it is a lot of work. Yeah, and I would say in the beginning, I bet I spend at least 8 to 10 hours per episode.
Yeah, and I hear that from people. I've been doing this now for about a decade almost, and I'm down to generally around 2 hours an episode or an hour after recording. So usually about an hour for the recording and then another hour of work. But that's after so much time and also a real commitment to good enough, which took a long time. When I was not as committed to good enough, I spent a lot more time. So I think that's small.
Well, I've learned a little bit more commitment to good enough and just not doing all of I've had to cut some of the content loose. I just couldn't keep it all up.
Yeah. Your mic you got a little quiet, just so you know.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I think something must have moved. So you also decided to have seasons and have them be a smaller sort of number of episodes, which I'm guessing is also part of that, let me approach this in a way that I know I can sustain. Right. What does that look like? What do you expect your cadence to be? And is any of that shifting now that you've done one season?
I don't think the cadence is going to change. One of the big good enough learnings, and this had to happen, that's happened right away because of the computer snafu in the beginning. I had to give my plan was to do every other week as my cadence. I had to give that up at times during the first season. And quite frankly, I don't know that it mattered. I know people say you have to be super consistent, have it all together. And there were if I had it to do over again, I would have 10 episodes in the can before I started if I could. It's not like I didn't know that. It just wasn't possible to do, right? It wasn't an education issue. I'd spent a year with all of you. I knew how to do that. And I've organized some things before. I knew that it wasn't a good idea to do your first season that way. And then I just had to give up. There were some seasons of busy where I'm like, well, it's 3 weeks between an episode rather than 2. I did that sometimes. And that's what ended up happening. Now I'm on a pretty routine. Every other Wednesday, I'm dropping an episode.
Well, and right now you're dropping some summer, your appearances on other podcasts. Right. What does the next season look like? Are you thinking it'll be similar to the first then? Are you thinking about 2 seasons a year, 1?
Yeah, I think I'm probably thinking about 2 seasons a year with a break of, it'll probably end up being sort of fall and then fall and spring-ish, kind of thing. I also might go to I'll see how it goes, but I might go to one season, honestly, kind of during what would be the normal school year, maybe with a few breaks at the holidays. And then either something like what I'm doing in the summer, dropping encore episodes of one thing or another here and there. The only thing that might speed up a little bit is that I might add some solo episodes that are like solo episodes are much easier and quicker to do. Like you can definitely pound one of those out in an hour. Like that's not a hard thing, hour or two and you're done. So now what I think I do, or so I might do that, especially, we don't have to go a lot into this, but I'm starting like literally in 2 weeks, I'm starting to live nomadically starting September 1st. So I'm planning on sharing that with my audience. So I probably will drop a few solos in there as well. And those might come in between the longer episodes.
And that will also probably reinforce the good enough approach, I have a feeling, because when you're nomadic,
totally will reinforce the good enough, because it's like, well, that's all it's going to happen.
That's all right. Well, going back to crowdfunding then, I just wanted to get a feel for what kind of you've learned through that first process. You're not crowdfunding, I don't think, another season, right?
No, I don't have the energy for that.
Yeah. So, which is perfect, because I want to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of what that experience was like for you.
Yeah.
So let's start on the pros. The cons is obviously going to be some of that stuff around energy drain and all of that. But what are the pros? What did that experience give you that you are like, I'm glad I did it for that reason?
Well, a couple of things. Well, one was a purely personal development thing. I had to get okay with asking for money.
Which is huge.
And am I good at asking for money still? I'm still uncomfortable with it, but I'm far closer to being neutral, at least, about asking for money for something I want to do. I would say that was like a huge personal growth moment. And what I realized from that, like related to that, is that asking for the money was relationship building. That is really counterintuitive, but I had so many phone calls and Zoom calls with friends and colleagues of people I know from, like, I've had a lot of different kinds of jobs. So from people I've known my whole adult life, or even longer in some cases, about like just to get to know, and honestly, those conversations were 90% not about the podcast. They were just catching up with people you love. And that was all it was. And since then, like there's one example I use a lot is that a colleague of mine who I adore, who I worked with when I was in Iowa, actually, Becky, we share that as a place we both lived. One of my friends and colleagues from there, we now Zoom once a month, and it came out of that conversation. Like I originally, we chatted or exchanged texts every once in a while, but like we didn't do that. And now it's just a standing thing on our calendars. Like we do a phone conversation like once a month-ish. And then I've been in more regular touch with even some of the other people who gave. And it was such a beautiful experience. And it was not all those, you get all that bunchy feeling, or at least me, you get that gross bunchy feeling inside, like, oh, asking for money is like the worst thing. And it's like, it really isn't. And it actually just enhanced my relationships with people. It was actually really great.
That's awesome.
So that was really great personal development. The other thing for the podcast, I would say, is that people knew I was doing a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's hard to prove this because I don't have another case that I can compare it to personally. But like, I mean, I think I had higher numbers because of that. Like, so even if people didn't give to the crowdfunding, I had literally been talking about launching a podcast from like July until I launched in January.
Even earlier than that, because you were in the podcast collective for a year, so you had people there that had known.
That's true. People in the podcast collective knew it way before that. Yeah. So like I had been talking about this podcast for at least a year, and then publicly for like, 7 months. So once it hit in January, people knew I was doing it.
Yeah.
And, I did have really good help, when I launched, to really have it blast out and be in places. So I think that, again, I don't have a test case for saying how the numbers are better, but I'm almost up to total. I have 17 episodes now with the summer ones, and I'm at almost 900 downloads total, which for a baby podcast is quite a bit.
That's great. Yeah. So the money, obviously, getting $5,000 of much needed money to help get the thing off the ground.
Right. I would not have been able to hire someone without that.
Absolutely. So, and the help, the flexing the asking muscle, which we all, especially those of us conditioned as women, probably need to learn to do more of. The deepening of those relationships that you had, and then the awareness around the show. Those are all really great pluses. So beautiful. Now let's talk about the other thing, because I think a lot of people think, oh, I'll just crowdsource something. I'll just crowdfund it. That sounds fun. That sounds easy. It sounds like free money, that kind of a thing, right?
Right.
It's not easy, and it was a lot of effort. So talk to me about
effort.
Yeah. What are the words of caution for people who might think, ooh, I'll just crowdfund my next podcast season or getting a new show off the ground?
Prepare. don't just slap it up on Kickstarter or make a link in Square or wherever. You have to really, like, before you ever, maybe not before you announce, but, before like you do the thing, you have to do a lot of, like in fundraising, they call it the quiet phase, like if you're doing a big fundraiser. So one of the things I did that was both scary and worked really well was that I thought about people in my sphere, in my life, who I thought both who are people who cheer me on, who are supporters, and who I thought might have a little bigger amounts to give. I sent an email. I don't know. It was at least 2 or 3 weeks before the launch of the crowdfunding, and with a good long email that you actually read for me, Becky, to give me some like feedback on, and said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. Would you consider giving right away or on the day of the first day of the crowdfunding?" Which worked really well. Now, did all those people give right away? No, but they all did give. Or everybody who said they would. There were a couple who didn't, who had to decline for various reasons. But and here's the other thing. Those people did not ghost me. They actually responded. So that's another thing. You get ghosted a lot in the business, in your lives in business. That did not happen with them. And so that was probably that again was a really good thing that I did. I had to get over that, but prepare. That's not something you're not doing it willy nilly. The other thing that you really have to prepare is that you have to get laser focused, really, really, really clear on you have to know your name. You need to know the purpose of your podcast. You have to be able to say that quickly and succinctly and be ready to do it 8,000 times. Because somebody's just hearing about it for the first time, even if you've already said it 1,000 times, right? Somebody else is hearing it again. And you have to just be in people's faces for a month. And when the initial month is going on, you do get a big response in the beginning. Everybody tells you this. I actually talked to people who had done a lot of crowdfunding. So I knew what to expect. There's a dip in the middle, but most of it is the messy middle where you're getting almost no money. And then you get a push at the end. And so you have to keep your energy going and celebrate even the $20 you got that week on, you know what I mean? So I was doing things, and I haven't done this kind of stuff in years. I was making reels, I don't know that those were worth it, but I was making videos every week. I was sending an email with an update every week. I was sending that to people who might give to me. And that is a boatload of work, by the way, for me. Yeah. And I do have some, I have some very, very limited hours, but I have some, just in general, I have some people who do some assisting of me making graphics and some other stuff for social media and whatnot. But
well, be prepared to talk about it.
It wasn't just me and my team, which is tiny, but a team that was doing all of that for a month. That's pretty much all I did for a month.
Starting early, being prepared to talk about it, and then talking about it more, and then talking about it more, and then talking about it more.
Talking about it more, and talking about it more, and talking about it more. And so don't stop talking about it.
Right, because I think there is some misconception that, you put out a crowdfunding thing and it's just going to seed itself. And it's almost like sitting back and doing nothing work, which we know is true of almost nothing in this world.
That is true of nothing.
Right. It's work. It's it's constant efforting. It's talking about it. Things that can make people very uncomfortable if you're not used to that. Like you said, having to learn to flex that asking muscle, the flexing, the talking about yourself muscle. And so knowing that before you go in, that you're going to be challenged in that way. And if that's not something you're ready for, then crowdfunding may not be the thing for you.
Yeah.
And just that it's a long haul too. So it can get draining. So you got to be prepared for that. And also the piece of you may not reach your goal. And so, because that happened with your initial goal wasn't where you got to. How did you deal with that?
I think I dealt with that pretty well, only because I knew that was a possibility from the beginning. I'm kind of an experimenter by nature. So that part wasn't too hard. But if you're someone who really needs to concretely map it out, I had it sort of in my head. I didn't have anything written, but I had at least looked within my Square system to know, okay, I can make a quick donation link if I want to pivot. I knew that I could do those things and do it pretty quickly. The pivot was simple. The building of the original pitch was much harder. And what I'll say is that here's my little sneaky advice. Go to Kickstarter and maybe even sign up for an account there so that you get their preparation materials, because they are top notch. I watched most of their prep videos and explaining how to make a good pitch, how to write it, how to how to do videos, like things like that in Kickstarter. But you don't have to use Kickstarter if you don't want to.
Yeah.
Now you can. I think there's advantages
especially
using
if
their platform.
if there's a chance you don't reach your goal. I think some of that is to ensure
they
that
take a cut too. That's the other thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I understand their model because it's like, we don't want you to raise money and then not be able to deliver on something and leave people hanging. So I
totally get why they do it. And it makes it really hard for things like a podcast that can get by with less money, honestly, you know, but a lot of people make products on there. If they only got a third of their money, they're not going to be able to make the product they're promising people. Like that wouldn't work. So I get it.
And I think one other thing is just that piece that you mentioned about tapping into other people's audiences, not just people with bigger money to give, but also people have bigger audiences than yours that you're able to, that you can kind of tap into through them. Because if you have 50 people on your email list, it's not to say that you can't raise $5,000, but it's going to be a bigger uphill battle than if you're walking into a Kickstarter or a, crowdsourcing or crowdfunding kind of campaign with a giant social media following, a giant email list, whatever. So just know that it's important, I think, also to right size your expectations to your existing sphere of influence, and then also think, how can I tap into other people's sphere of influence to widen mine if I don't have a large one? So
and that's where like the podcast, like FBC came in really handy, because a number of people had me do like Substack lives or other kinds of live conversations about the crowdfunding with them. A lot of people, and then even with some of those people who, with at least one that I can think of, someone who said, no, I'm not going to be able to give right now. I said, well, you have a network. Like, would you share it in your net? Like, these are other, and I was constantly giving people options of what they could do to share. And people did that a lot for me. I don't know at the end of the day that very many people gave because of that, though. That was really interesting. Like, unless they were mutual connections, you know what I mean? They had to be mutual connections to me.
But going back to
but it still helped.
When your show launches, the awareness is out there. So that may not be the goal of the crowdfunding effort, but it can be one of those byproducts of it too, is that increased visibility. So
I might make it a primary goal if I were to crowdfund again. Because I mean, the money would be number two as the goal. That'd be really
interesting, though, Nicole, is to, instead of the crowdfunding effort being people raising money, that they commit to a certain number, sharing the podcast a certain number of times or something, and then seeing.
That's an interesting idea,
right? And then does that effort relate to a spike in downloads or whatever?
Yeah.
We're just brainstorming here. Somebody try it and tell us. Thank you for doing this, Nicole. Your podcast is just rest. The first season's out. Right now you're on like a hiatus, but still content being shared because you're repurposing, which is a great example for people to see how that can look. To do that while you're still giving yourself some increased downtime.
It's been a blast to share those, actually. And I'm listening to episode. I just dropped one today, as a matter of fact, that was recorded over a year ago. And I was like, I would answer that question really differently now.
I'll link to it, and I'll link to your website as well if you're interested in more about Nicole and your work, coaching work around burnout. So thank you so much for doing this. Thanks for being a member of FTC, and I really appreciate you.
Of course. No, thank you. I appreciate it, Becky.